"What are you doing here, old man?" The officer's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Charles Thompson's hands trembled, not from fear, but from decades of this same moment replaying itself. He'd built this park with his own designs, poured his heart into every pathway. Now a badge questioned his right to exist in it. But someone was watching. Someone who would change everything. Stay with me until the end, and comment your city below. Let's see how far this story travels. The morning sun broke over Oakwood Park like a promise, golden gentle, the kind of light that makes you believe the world might actually be good. Charles Thompson had seen 73 of these mornings from this exact bench, and he'd learned not to trust promises. He sat with his coffee steaming in the October chill, his newspaper folded to the crossword puzzle he'd never quite finish. The bench beneath him was worn smooth from years of use, its bronze plaque reading, "Designed by Charles Thompson, 1994. May this space bring our community together." Charles ran his weathered fingers over those words, feeling the grooves like he was reading Braille. 30 years. 30 years since the city council had finally approved his design after 5 rejections. 30 years since he'd proven that a black architect from the South Side could create something beautiful, something lasting. But memory was a double-edged sword. Grandpa Thompson. A small voice shattered his reverie. Little Maya Rodriguez, 6 years old with pigtails bouncing, ran toward him with the kind of joy that only children possess, that fearless, unguarded happiness that the world hasn't beaten out of them yet. "Well, good morning, Miss Maya," Charles said, his face transforming into the warm smile he reserved for the neighborhood kids. "Aren't you up early?" "Mama says early bird gets the worm." She climbed onto the bench beside him, her sneakers dangling several inches from the ground. "What are you reading?" "The news, sweetheart. Boring old people stuff." "Is it about rockets?" "I like rockets." Charles chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "No rockets today, I'm afraid. But tell me, how's school treating you?" Maya launched into an animated story about her art class, her small hands painting pictures in the air. Charles listened with the patience of someone who understood that these moments, these simple, beautiful moments, were what life was really about. Not the buildings he'd designed, not the awards collecting dust in his study. This, connection, humanity. Maya Mejita. Rosa Rodriguez appeared on the path, slightly out of breath. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson." She ran ahead again. "No apology necessary, Rosa. She brightens my morning." Charles winked at Maya. "Doesn't she brighten everything?" Rosa's smile was tired but genuine. She worked 2 jobs, one at the hospital, one cleaning offices downtown. Charles had watched her daughter grow up in this park, had seen Rosa age faster than she should have, the weight of survival etched into the lines around her eyes. "You're too kind," Rosa said. "Come on, mija. We're going to be late." "Bye, Grandpa Thompson?" Maya waved enthusiastically as her mother guided her toward the park exit. "Bye, sweetheart. Study hard." The park settled back into its morning rhythm. Joggers circled the outer path. A group of Tai Chi practitioners moved through their forms near the fountain. His fountain the centerpiece he'd fought the budget committee tooth and nail to include. The water caught the sunlight and threw diamonds across the grass. Charles took a long sip of his coffee. It was lukewarm now, but he didn't mind. His doctor had told him to cut back on caffeine anyway. "Your heart." "Doctor," Patel had said with that concerned look doctors perfect in medical school. "It's not what it used to be, Charles. You need to take it easy." Taking it easy. At 73, what else was there to do? He opened his newspaper again, trying to focus on the crossword. 7 across, persistent bias. 9 letters. Prejudice. Charles set down his pen. Isn't that what it always came back to? He'd spent his entire life proving himself, and still. There were days when the world looked at him and saw nothing but suspicion. The sound of footsteps, heavy, purposeful, interrupted his thoughts. Charles glanced up. A young police officer was walking through the park, his eyes scanning left and right with the kind of vigilance that turned observation into interrogation. He was maybe 25, 26. Clean cut. The kind of recruit who probably graduated top of his academy class and thought that made him ready for the real world. Officer J. Daniels, according to his nameplate. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Charles nodded politely, the way he'd learned to do acknowledge authority. Don't give them a reason. Stay small. Stay safe. But Daniels didn't nod back. Instead, his trajectory shifted. He was heading straight for Charles's bench. Here we go. Charles thought, his heart rate ticking upward. His medication was in his jacket pocket, but he didn't reach for it. Never let them see weakness. That was another lesson learned the hard way. Morning, officer. Charles said, his voice carefully neutral. Daniels stopped 3 feet away, hands on his belt in that universal cop stance, legs apart, chest forward, dominance displayed. What are you doing here? The question hung in the air like smoke. Charles blinked. I'm sorry. I asked what you're doing here, in the park, this early. I'm sitting on a bench, officer, reading my newspaper, having coffee. Charles gestured to the items in question, his movements slow and deliberate. Is there a problem? That depends. You live around here. I do. 27 Cedar Street, about 4 blocks that way. Charles pointed east. I've lived there for 32 years. Uh-huh. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Got any ID on you? Something cold settled in Charles's stomach. Officer, I'm just sitting in a park, in broad daylight. I haven't done anything wrong. I didn't say you did. I'm asking if you have identification. The other parkgoers were starting to notice now. The joggers slowed their pace. The Tai Chi group's movements faltered. Charles could feel their eyes, their curiosity, their concern, or worse, their confirmation of whatever biases they carried. Of course I have identification. Charles reached slowly for his wallet, moving with the exaggerated care of someone who knew that sudden movements could be fatal. May I ask why you need to see it? We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Suspicious activity. Charles couldn't keep the edge out of his voice. And I look suspicious to you, sitting on a bench reading the newspaper. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down. I am calm. Charles held up his driver's license. Charles Franklin Thompson, 73 years old, registered voter, taxpayer. And this bench, his voice cracked slightly. This bench was designed by me. This entire park was designed by me. The fountain over there, mine. The curved pathways that follow the natural topography, mine. The community garden near the south entrance, mine. Daniels took the ID, barely glancing at it. That's a nice story, sir, but I still need to verify. It's not a story, it's a fact. There's a plaque right there. Charles started to point. Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them. The world tilted slightly. Charles's chest tightened, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of déjà vu. How many times? How many times in one life did you have to prove your humanity, Officer Daniels? Charles forced himself to breathe slowly. I'm not reaching for a weapon. I'm pointing at a plaque that has my name on it. This is my park. I designed it. I poured my heart into it. And now you're standing here treating me like a criminal for existing in it. I'm doing my job. Daniel's jaw tightened. And right now my job is to ensure public safety. So, if you could just cooperate. I am cooperating. Charles's voice rose, and he immediately regretted it. Never raise your voice. Never give them ammunition. But God, he was tired. 73 years tired. Sir, if you can't calm down, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Leave. This is a public park. And I'm a police officer with the authority to remove individuals who sit while black, who rid while black, who dare to exist while black. The words came out before Charles could stop them, Decades of restraint finally cracking. Daniels's face hardened. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Enlighten me, officer. What crime am I committing right now? A small crowd had gathered at a distance, people watching with their phones half raised, unsure whether to intervene or document. Charles recognized some of them. Mrs. Chen from the corner store, Marcus from the barber shop, young couples he'd seen walking their dogs. But none of them stepped forward. They never did. Fear was a powerful silencer. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to provide your identification and cooperate, or I'll have to... You'll have to what? Charles stood up, his newspaper falling to the ground. His legs were stiff, his heart hammering against his ribs. Arrest me for sitting in a park I helped build, for drinking coffee in a space I designed specifically so the community would have somewhere to gather, somewhere safe. The irony wasn't lost on him. Daniels stepped closer, his hand moving to his radio. Sir. Don't sir me like we're having a civil conversation. You approached me with suspicion because of what I look like. Because an old black man sitting alone must be up to something, right? Must be. That's not. It is. It always is. I've been here before, officer. Different decade, different face, same damn prejudice. Charles's voice broke on the last word. 73 years of swallowing rage, of being professional, of taking the high road, and for what? To be harassed in the park, he'd literally drawn into existence, his chest tightened further. The pain was sharper now, radiating down his left arm. Not now, not here. He couldn't give Daniels the satisfaction of Mr. Thompson. A woman's voice concerned. Mrs. Chen had broken from the crowd. Are you okay? You look pale. I'm fine. Charles managed, but he wasn't. His vision was swimming. Daniels grabbed his arm, not gently. Sir, you need to sit back down. Don't touch me. Charles tried to pull away, and the motion sent lightning through his chest. He gasped, stumbling backward. Sir, I said don't touch me. Charles's legs buckled. The world spun. Somewhere in the distance, someone was shouting. Mrs. Chen Marcus. He couldn't tell. The morning sun was too bright, the pain too sharp, the humiliation too deep. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Not here. Not in the park he'd built as a symbol of unity and hope. Not at the hands of someone who saw him as a threat instead of a human being. He felt himself falling. Felt Daniels trying to steady him with the same hands that had grabbed him moments before. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Someone call an ambulance. Daniels was yelling now, his voice high with panic. Sir, stay with me, sir. But Charles was somewhere else. He was 23 again, fresh out of architecture school, standing in front of a bank loan officer who'd looked at his designs and said, These are impressive, but we don't typically finance projects in your neighborhood. He was 35, being pulled over for driving through a suburb where he'd just finished designing a library. He was 48, watching his son, his brilliant, kind, gentle son, get handcuffed because someone had reported a suspicious person walking home from school. Different decade, different face, same damn prejudice. Let him go. The voice cut through everything, the pain, the memories, the chaos. It was quiet, but carried the weight of absolute authority. Charles's vision cleared slightly. There was someone else now, someone standing behind Daniels. Someone in uniform. I said let him go. Daniels' grip loosened. Chief, I don't care what you were just doing. Step back, now. Chief Charles tried to focus, but his heart was still racing, his chest still burning. He felt strong hands, different hands, gentler hands, supporting him. Easy, Mr. Thompson. I've got you. Just breathe. Slow and steady. Charles looked up into a face he vaguely recognized. Chief Raymond Mitchell. They'd met before years ago at some community event. The chief had been a captain then, had actually listened when Charles spoke about neighborhood policing and trust building. Chief, Charles whispered. I wasn't. I know. I saw the whole thing. Mitchell's voice was steady professional, but Charles could hear the anger underneath. Daniels, call for an ambulance. Then wait by my car. We're going to have a very long conversation. But Chief, I was just checking. Now, Officer Daniels. The young cop retreated, fumbling for his radio. Mitchell helped Charles sit back down on the bench, kneeling beside him so they were at eye level. Are you okay? Mitchell asked. Your color's not good. Do you have medication? Charles nodded weakly toward his jacket pocket. Mitchell retrieved the small bottle of nitroglycerin, helped him take one tablet. This is ridiculous, Charles muttered. I'm fine. I don't need an ambulance. With all due respect, Mr. Thompson, you're not fine, and after what just happened, we're not taking chances. Mitchell's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. The crowd had grown larger now. Charles could hear people murmuring, phones clicking. Tomorrow this would be on social media, local news. Elderly black man harassed in park. Another story, another statistic, another example of everything that was still wrong. Mrs. Chen pushed through, dropping to her knees beside him. Mr. Thompson, I called your daughter. She's on her way. You didn't have to do that, Helen. I'm all right. No, you're not. Her eyes were fierce. And this, she gestured at Daniels, this is not all right. None of this is all right. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens cutting through the morning peace Charles had been enjoying just 30 minutes earlier. 30 minutes. That's all it had taken for his quiet morning to become a spectacle. The paramedics were professional kind. They took his vitals, asked questions, prepared to transport him. I'm riding with you, Chief Mitchell said. It wasn't a request. Chief, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Mitchell's voice dropped lower. And when you're feeling better, we need to talk. Really talk. Because what happened here today... He looked back at Daniels, who stood by the patrol car looking shell-shocked. This can't keep happening. Not in Oakwood. Not anywhere. As the paramedics loaded Charles onto the stretcher, he caught a glimpse of his park. His beautiful park with its fountain and curved pathways, its community garden and gathering spaces. He'd designed it to be a place where everyone belonged, where differences dissolved in the simple pleasure of sunshine and green space. But belonging, he realized, wasn't something you could design into a blueprint. It had to be built in hearts, one person at a time. And right now, looking at the crowd of concerned faces, black, white, Asian, Latino, young and old, Charles wondered if maybe, just maybe, the foundation was stronger than he'd thought. Mr. Thompson. One of the paramedics touched his shoulder gently. We're ready to go. Charles nodded. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, he saw Maya and her mother rushing into the park, Rosa's face stricken with worry. Grandpa Thompson. Maya's voice was small, scared. I'm okay, sweetheart, Charles called out, summoning strength he didn't quite feel. Grandpa's okay. I promise. But as the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, sirens silent but lights flashing, Charles Thompson closed his eyes and wondered if that promise was one he could keep. The park disappeared behind them, bathed in morning sunlight, beautiful and broken all at once. The fluorescent lights of Oakwood General Hospital burned too bright, too sterile. Charles lay in the emergency room, bed wires and monitors mapping the rhythm of his heart, a heart that had weathered 73 years of triumph and trauma and now beat with the irregular stutter of a man pushed too far. Chief Raymond Mitchell stood near the window, his broad frame silhouetted against the morning light, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low but tense, speaking in the clipped tones of someone who'd made a decision and wouldn't be swayed. Charles caught fragments: immediate suspension, full investigation. I don't care about the union, Tom. This stops now. A nurse bustled in, checked Charles's vitals with practiced efficiency, offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd seen this before. They all had. Different patient, same story. Your daughter should be here soon, Mr. Thompson, she said gently. Your pressure's stabilizing, but Dr. Mendoza wants to run a few more tests, just to be safe. Safe. Charles repeated the word foreign in his mouth. He'd been safe on his bench reading his paper, minding his own business. Look where safe had gotten him. The nurse squeezed his hand, a gesture of solidarity that said everything words couldn't, and slipped out. Mitchell ended his call, turned to face Charles with an expression that mixed concern and rage in equal measure. "How are you feeling?" the chief asked. "Like I've had this conversation before," Charles said quietly. "Different hospital, different decade." Mitchell pulled a chair close to the bed, sat down heavily. Up close, Charles could see the man was older than he'd first appeared, early 50s maybe, with gray threading through his temples and crow's feet that spoke of years squinting into difficult situations. "Tell me," Mitchell said simply. "Tell you what? The story you already know. The one every black man in America knows by heart." Charles's voice was tired, empty of the anger that had consumed him in the park. Anger required energy, and he had none left. "I'm 73 years old, Chief. I built that park. Literally designed it from nothing. Fought the city council for 2 years to get it approved. And this morning, I needed permission to exist in it." Mitchell leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I saw everything. I was there early doing my usual morning walk. I saw Daniels approach you. Saw the whole thing unfold." He paused, jaw working. "I've been chief for 3 years. Before that, I spent 20 years working my way up through the ranks. You know what the hardest part of this job is?" Charles waited. Watching good intentions turn toxic. Daniels isn't a bad kid. He graduated second in his academy class. Volunteers at the youth center on weekends. Helps his grandmother with her grocery shopping every Thursday. Mitchell's voice hardened. But somewhere along the way, someone taught him that suspicion is the same thing as safety. That profiling is just being cautious. That his badge gives him the right to demand explanations for existence. "And you're going to unteach him?" Charles asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Chief, I've seen good intentions before. They look great in press conferences and policy memos. But in the park, at a traffic stop, in a store, that's where truth lives. And the truth is, your officer saw an old black man and decided I was a problem that needed solving." "You're right." The admission hung between them, stark and unadorned. "You're absolutely right," Mitchell continued, "and I can't fix 73 years of this in one morning. But I can start with today, with Daniels, with making it crystal clear that this department doesn't get to operate on assumptions and fear." He met Charles's eyes directly. "I'm suspending him pending a full investigation, and I want you to be part of what comes next." "Part of what?" "The solution, the change, the..." The door burst open. Charles's daughter Diane rushed in with the force of a hurricane, her face stricken. Her professional composure, she was a corporate lawyer downtown, completely shattered. "Dad!" She was at his bedside, instantly, hands fluttering over him as if checking that he was real, whole, still breathing. "Dad, what happened? Mrs. Rodriguez called me. She said police were..." Her eyes found Mitchell's uniform, and her expression transformed from fear to fury. "Who are you?" "Chief Raymond Mitchell, ma'am. I don't care if you're the governor. What did your officers do to my father?" "Diane," Charles said softly, reaching for her hand. "Honey, let him explain." "Explain? Mrs. Rodriguez said you collapsed. Said some cop was harassing you in the park." Diane's voice cracked. "You have a heart condition, Dad. You're supposed to avoid stress. And they..." "I know." Mitchell stood, his voice firm, but not defensive. "And your father is right to be angry. You're right to be angry. What happened this morning was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for the actions of my officer." Diane stared at him, breathing hard. Lawyer instincts warring with daughter terror. Full responsibility. Does that come with consequences? Chief, or just empty words? The officer has been suspended. There will be a complete investigation. And, Mitchell glanced at Charles, I'm hoping your father will agree to work with me on making sure this never happens again. Work with you? Diane's laugh was bitter. You want my father, who was just traumatized by your department, to come fix your broken system, That's rich. Diane, Charles squeezed her hand. Let's take a breath. But Diane was just getting started. Years of being her father's daughter, of watching him navigate a world that consistently underestimated and dismissed him, of seeing him come home exhausted from battles he shouldn't have had to fight, had built a reservoir of protective fury that now came flooding out. Do you know how many times I've gotten calls like this, Chief? How many times I've had to leave work, heart-pounding, terrified that this time it won't just be harassment. This time they'll have actually... She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Mitchell didn't look away. Too many times, I know. And I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't... Baby girl. Charles's voice was gentle but firm. He hadn't called her that in years, not since she was small enough to sit in his lap while he sketched building designs at the kitchen table. I'm okay, I promise. And this man, he nodded at Mitchell. He's trying. That's more than I usually get. Diane collapsed into the chair Mitchell had vacated her head in her hands. When she looked up, tears streaked her carefully applied makeup. I'm so tired, Dad. Tired of this. Tired of being scared every time you go out. You're 73. You should be able to sit in a damn park without... Her voice broke again. The three of them sat in silence, the monitors beeping steadily, measuring the aftermath of fear in electrical impulses and blood pressure numbers. Outside in the hallway hospital, life continued. Doctors being paged, gurneys rolling past the everyday chaos of people fighting to save lives, while somewhere a few miles away, others were learning new ways to diminish them. Dr. Mendoza entered his tablet already pulled up with Charles's chart. He was young, maybe 40, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering to ever be truly carefree again. Mr. Thompson, good news. Your heart's holding steady. The episode appears to have been stress-induced arrhythmia, not a full cardiac event. We'll keep you for observation for a few hours, but I think you're going to be fine. He paused. Physically, at least. What about mentally? Charles asked wryly. Got a prescription for that? Dr. Mendoza's smile was sad. If I did, I'd be writing a lot of them. The stress of what you experience that does real damage, Mr. Thompson. Your body's been flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. Your blood pressure spiked. Your heart went into overdrive. That's not just emotional trauma, it's physiological harm. So what you're saying, Diane cut in her lawyer voice returning, is that the officer's actions directly caused a medical emergency. I'm saying that the human body isn't designed to handle that level of stress repeatedly. And from what I understand, this isn't Mr. Thompson's first experience with... Dr. Mendoza chose his words carefully. This type of encounter. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Good, Charles thought. Be uncomfortable. Sit with it. We're going to do better. Mitchell said more to himself than anyone else. We have to do better. After Dr. Mendoza left, promising to return with discharge papers in a few hours, Diane's phone began buzzing incessantly. She glanced at it, frowned. It's already on social media, she said quietly. Someone filmed it. The video's spreading. Charles closed his eyes. Of course it was. In 2025, nothing happened in isolation. Everything was documented, shared, commented on. He'd become a hashtag, a trending topic. Another piece of evidence in an endless argument about whose lives mattered and when. Let me see, Mitchell said. Diane hesitated, then turned her phone so he could watch. Charles couldn't see the screen, but he could hear his own voice strained and rising. Who, what, who sit while black, who read while black? Could hear Daniel's clipped responses, defensive and escalating. Could hear the moment his breath caught the gasps from bystanders. Mitchell's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Send me that link. I need to see what the department's communications team is dealing with. Dealing with? Diane's eyebrows shot up. This isn't a PR problem, Chief. This is a human rights problem. I know that, but the phone lines are going to light up and I need to get ahead of... He stopped himself, hearing how it sounded. I'm not trying to spin this. I'm trying to make sure the response is appropriate, that we're not just issuing statements, we're taking action." Charles watched this exchange with detached fascination. He'd become abstract again, not a person, but a situation to be managed, a crisis to be navigated. Even Mitchell, with his apparent good intentions, couldn't quite see past the optics to the man in the hospital bed who just wanted to drink his damn coffee in peace. "Chief," Charles said, his voice cutting through their argument, "where's Officer Daniels now?" Mitchell turned. "Back at the station, suspended as I said. Why?" "Because I want to talk to him." Both Diane and Mitchell spoke at once. "Absolutely not. And that's not." Charles held up his hand. "I spent my entire career as an architect learning that you can't fix a structure by just patching holes. You have to understand why it's failing in the first place. That young man, he didn't wake up this morning planning to harass an old man in a park. Something in his training, his experience, his worldview told him I was a threat. I want to know what." "Dad, you don't owe him anything," Diane protested. "This isn't about owing, it's about understanding. Because if I don't understand what made him see me as dangerous, how do I know it won't happen again? How do you when you're walking to your car after work? How does any of us?" Mitchell studied Charles for a long moment. "You really want to sit down with him?" "I do, but not today. Today I'm tired. Today I need to go home, take my medication, maybe sit in my own damn living room without anyone questioning my right to exist there." The bitterness crept back into his voice. "But soon. Set it up, Chief. Let's see if your officer and I can find some common ground." "And if you can't," Mitchell asked, "then at least we'll both know exactly where we stand." The hours crawled by. Diane stayed glued to his side, working on her laptop, but constantly glancing up to make sure he was still breathing. Mitchell left to deal with what he called the situation at the station, promising to return before Charles was discharged. The video continued to spread. Diane showed him reluctantly. It had been viewed over 50,000 times in just 3 hours, shared by community activists, local news outlets, even some national accounts. The comments section was a war zone, people arguing about facts that weren't in dispute, choosing sides before they knew the full story. But some comments caught Charles's attention. Users from Oakwood, people who knew him. "That's Mr. Thompson. He designed the park. This man is a pillar of our community. This is disgusting. I've known Charles for 20 years. This should never have happened. Where was this? I'm coming down there right now." That last one worried him. The last thing he needed was an angry mob forming in his name, turning his trauma into someone else's cause. "Diane, can you call Rosa, Mrs. Rodriguez? I want to make sure Maya's okay. She saw me being taken away and..." "Already did, Dad. Called her an hour ago. Maya's fine. Asking about you. Rosa said she explained you're a tough old grandpa who just needed a checkup." Charles smiled weakly. "Tough old grandpa. That's one way to put it." Around noon there was a soft knock at the door. Helen Chen entered carrying a thermos and a paper bag that smelled like heaven. "Mrs. Chen?" Charles said, surprised. "You didn't have to..." "Hush. Hospital food is terrible and I know you haven't eaten." She set the container on his bedside table. "Wonton soup, mild, good for the heart, and some steamed bao." Diane stood to hug her. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. That's so thoughtful." Helen waved off the gratitude, but her eyes were fierce when she looked at Charles. "I called the mayor's office, told them what I saw, told them this city should be ashamed." She switched to Mandarin, speaking rapidly to Diane, who understood from years of living in the neighborhood. Diane nodded, responding in kind, and Helen seemed satisfied. She patted Charles's hand once more before leaving, promising to check on his house, water his plants. "What did she say?" Charles asked after she left. "That the Chinese community is organizing. They want to attend the next city council meeting, demand accountability." Diane's voice was careful, waiting to see how he'd react. Charles sighed. "This is going to get bigger than me, isn't it?" "It already is, Dad. It's not just about you anymore. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere they have every right to be. She was right, of course, but that didn't make it easier. Charles had spent his life trying to build things, create spaces, design solutions. Now he was the problem that needed solving, the wound that exposed all the others. When Mitchell returned in the late afternoon, he brought news. "The mayor wants to meet with you. The city council's called an emergency session for tomorrow night. And..." He hesitated. "There's going to be a protest at the police station tonight. About 200 people already confirmed on social media." "A protest," Charles repeated numbly. "It's peaceful so far. People with signs demanding justice, accountability. The usual." The usual. What a strange phrase for describing outrage. "I need to ask you something," Mitchell continued. "And you can say no. But the department's communications team thinks it would help if you made a statement, video or written, just to let people know you're okay, that we're taking this seriously." "Help who?" Charles asked. "Help you manage the narrative. Help calm people down so they don't make your job harder." Mitchell flinched, but didn't argue. "Fair point. But also, people are worried about you. The community wants to know you're all right. That's real too." Charles looked at Diane. She shrugged, leaving the decision to him. "I'll make a statement," Charles said finally. "But I'll say what I want to say. No scripts, no PR review. My words." "Deal." They recorded it right there in the hospital room, Diane holding up her phone, while Charles sat propped up in bed, still wearing the hospital gown, monitors visible in the background. He wanted people to see the cost of what had happened, not a polished press conference. "My name is Charles Thompson." He began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "This morning, I went to Oakwood Park, a park I designed 30 years ago to enjoy my coffee and read my newspaper. What should have been a peaceful morning turned into a medical emergency because a police officer decided I looked suspicious." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm okay. My heart is okay. But I want to be very clear about something. This isn't just about one officer or one morning. This is about a pattern, a system that teaches people to fear what they don't understand, to suspect before they know, to demand compliance before offering respect." His voice grew stronger. "I've lived in Oakwood for over 30 years. I've paid my taxes, served on community boards, designed buildings that still stand as proof that I was here, that I mattered. And yet this morning, none of that was visible to Officer Daniels. All he saw was an old black man who didn't fit his idea of who belongs in a park on a Tuesday morning." Charles looked directly into the camera. "To the people organizing protests, signing petitions, demanding change, thank you. Your anger is justified. Your demands for accountability are right. But I want to ask you to channel that anger into action that builds rather than destroys. We need systemic change, yes, but we also need individual transformation. We need officers like Daniels to understand not just that what he did was wrong, but why it was wrong." He took a breath. "Chief Mitchell has asked me to be part of that process, and I've agreed. Not because I owe anyone my labor or my forgiveness, but because I've spent my life building things, and I want to build this too, a community where the color of your skin doesn't determine whether you're seen as a neighbor or a threat." Another pause. "I'm tired. I'm 73 years old and I'm tired, but I'm not giving up. Because the alternative, accepting this as normal, as inevitable, that's not something I can live with. So we move forward, together, with hard conversations and uncomfortable truths and a commitment to actually change, not just talk about it." Charles's eyes softened slightly. "And to little Maya, who saw me being taken away this morning, Grandpa Thompson is fine, I promise. Don't let this morning make you afraid of the world. Let it make you determined to change it." He nodded, and Diane stopped recording. "That good?" Charles asked. Mitchell was staring at him with something like awe. Yeah, that was good." Diane reviewed the video, then looked at her father with pride shining in her eyes. "You always know exactly what to say, Dad." "I've had 73 years of practice." he said quietly. They posted the video within the hour. By the time Charles was discharged at 5 p.m. with strict instructions to rest and follow up with his cardiologist, it had been viewed over 200,000 times. The world, it seemed, was watching Oakwood Park now. And whether Charles Thompson wanted it or not, he'd become the face of a fight that was much bigger than one morning, one officer, one old man who just wanted to drink his coffee in peace. As Diane drove him home through streets he'd known his entire adult life, Charles stared out the window at the familiar buildings, the corner stores and bus stops and small houses with their tidy lawns. Somewhere in this city, Officer Daniels was having his own reckoning. Somewhere Chief Mitchell was preparing for the storm about to hit his department. Somewhere people were making signs and organizing meetings and deciding what justice should look like. And Charles, despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the pain and the weight of 7 decades worth of this same damn moment, felt something unexpected stirring in his chest. Hope. Fragile, tentative, probably foolish hope. But hope nonetheless. The house felt different when Charles walked through the door. Same furniture, same photographs on the mantel, same crack in the ceiling he'd been meaning to fix for 5 years. But everything had shifted slightly, like the world had tilted a few degrees, and nothing quite lined up anymore. Diane insisted on staying the night. She set up camp in his guest room, her childhood bedroom really, though she'd lived downtown for 15 years now. Charles could hear her on the phone in hushed tones, talking to her husband Michael, explaining why she wouldn't be home. He says he's fine, but I need to be here, just tonight. Maybe tomorrow too. Charles sat in his leather recliner, the one his wife Margaret had bought him for his 60th birthday, 3 years before the cancer took her. He could still feel her presence in this house in every carefully chosen color and thoughtfully placed photograph. Margaret would have had words about this morning. Strong words. She'd never been one to suffer injustice quietly. "What would you do, Maggie?" he whispered to the empty room. "How would you make sense of this?" But Margaret wasn't there to answer, and Charles was left alone with the weight of a day that had started with coffee and ended with the entire city talking about him. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years, friends from his old firm, former colleagues from the Architecture Association. Even his son Robert called from Seattle, his voice tight with worry and barely controlled rage. "Dad, I saw the video. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow." "Bobby, you don't need to do that. I'm fine." "Fine. You collapsed. Some cop put his hands on you and—" "Your sister's here. I'm okay. Really." But Robert was his mother's son, stubborn and protective. "I'm coming anyway. You can't stop me." Charles smiled despite everything. Wouldn't dream of trying. After he hung up, Diane appeared with chamomile tea and the expression she'd worn since she was 6 years old, whenever she was determined to take care of him. "Drink," she commanded, setting the cup in his hands. "And then you're going to bed. Doctor's orders." "I'm not tired." "I don't care. You're resting." They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who'd loved each other through decades of ordinary moments and extraordinary trials. Finally, Diane spoke. "The city council meeting is tomorrow night. Chief Mitchell called. He wants to know if you're planning to attend." Charles sipped his tea, considering. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you should rest. Let other people fight this battle for once." She met his eyes. "But I know you won't. I built this city building by building, park by park. I can't hide while people argue about what my life is worth." "Your life is worth everything, Dad. That shouldn't be up for debate." "But it is. It always has been." He set down his cup. "Tomorrow night I'll go. I'll sit in that council chamber and I'll listen. And if I need to speak, I will." Diane looked like she wanted to argue but knew better. Instead, she kissed his forehead. "Then I'm coming with you. And so is Robert. And probably half the neighborhood from the looks of my inbox." She wasn't exaggerating. By the next morning, when Charles finally emerged from his bedroom after a fitful night of shallow sleep and vivid dreams, His front porch was covered in flowers. Bouquets from neighbors, cards from strangers, even a handmade sign from what appeared to be Mrs. Chen's grandchildren. "We love Mr. Thompson, Justice for all." Marcus from the barber shop showed up at 9 with breakfast sandwiches and strong coffee. From the shop, everyone wanted to send something. "You're not allowed to pay," he added when Charles reached for his wallet. "Marcus, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." Marcus settled into Margaret's old chair, his massive frame dwarfing the delicate upholstery. "Mr. Thompson, I've been cutting hair in Oakwood for 22 years. You know how many times I've heard stories like yours from my customers, my family, my own damn self." His voice dropped. 3 months ago, my nephew got stopped walking home from basketball practice. 15 years old, and they had him spread on the hood of a car because he matched a description. You know what description, black male teenager. That's it. Charles closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Be loud. Because if it's happening to Charles Thompson, respected architect, pillar of the community, man who built half this city, then what hope do the rest of us have?" They talked for an hour, Marcus sharing stories Charles had never heard, revealing the quiet indignities that accumulated like dust in the corners of everyday life. The woman who clutched her purse tighter when Marcus sat next to her on the bus. The store manager who followed him down every aisle. The way people seemed surprised when he spoke articulately about literature or politics, as if his profession and his skin color couldn't possibly coexist with intelligence. "We're tired, Mr. Thompson, all of us. So when Chief Mitchell says he wants change, I need to know if he means it. Not just policy changes that look good on paper, but real transformation. The kind that makes my nephew safe to walk home at night." After Marcus left, the visitors kept coming. Rosa and Maya brought homemade tamales. Young couples Charles recognized from the park stopped by with offers to help however they could. Even teenagers he'd never met appeared wanting to hear his story firsthand, their phones recording everything for TikTok and Instagram. By afternoon, Charles was exhausted from the attention. Grateful when Diane finally shut the door and declared visiting hours over. "You need to conserve energy for tonight," she said firmly. "The meeting starts at 7. Robert's flight lands at 5. We'll pick him up and go straight there." Charles nodded, retreating to his study. The room was lined with blueprints and architectural models, a lifetime of creation preserved behind glass. He pulled out the original drawings for Oakwood Park, spreading them across his drafting table. His younger hand had sketched these lines full of idealism and determination to create something beautiful for a community that needed beauty. The curved pathways weren't just aesthetic. They encouraged people to slow down, to wander, to encounter each other unexpectedly. The fountain at the center represented gathering unity. The community garden spaces spoke to growth, both literal and metaphorical. Every element had meaning, purpose. But Charles hadn't been able to design away prejudice, hadn't been able to blueprint his way to belonging. His phone rang. Chief Mitchell. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to give you a heads up before tonight. The meeting's going to be packed. We're expecting several hundred people. And Officer Daniels." Mitchell paused. "He's asked permission to attend, to apologize publicly." Charles's hand tightened on the phone. "Has he now?" "I told him it wasn't about what he wanted, that your comfort and safety come first. So I'm asking, do you want him there?" It was a strange thing having power in a situation where he'd had none. Charles thought about the young officer's face in the park, that mixture of authority and fear. Thought about Marcus's nephew on a car hood. Thought about Maya's future and what world he wanted to leave her. "Yes," Charles said finally. "He should be there. We both should. Let's see if we can make something meaningful out of this mess." "You're a better man than most, Mr. Thompson. I'm just tired of the alternative, Chief." When Robert arrived bursting through the door with the energy of a man who'd spent 5 hours on a plane rehearsing arguments, Charles felt something in his chest loosen. His son was 48, but still moved like the athlete he'd been in college, all coiled intensity and protective instinct. "Dad." Robert wrapped him in a hug that lifted Charles slightly off the ground. "Don't ever scare me like that again." "I'll try to avoid being harassed by police in the future," Charles said dryly. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny." Robert pulled back, studying his father's face with the scrutiny of someone searching for cracks. "You look tired." "I am tired. But I'm okay, son. Really." The three of them, Charles, Diane, and Robert, drove to City Hall in Robert's rental car, arriving 30 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to start. The parking lot was already full, people streaming toward the building, carrying signs and determination in equal measure. "Justice for Mr. Thompson. Black Lives Matter in Oakwood. No more profiling." Charles felt Robert tense beside him. "This is surreal." "This is necessary," Diane corrected. "Come on, let's get Dad inside before the crowd gets bigger." But they'd been spotted. A ripple moved through the gathering, people turning, pointing, then beginning to applaud. The sound built like a wave rolling across the parking lot, until hundreds of people were clapping, some cheering, others calling out messages of support. Charles stood frozen, overwhelmed. An older woman pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said, grabbing his hands. "Thank you for being brave, for not staying silent." "I didn't do anything," Charles protested. "You existed. You refused to disappear. That's everything." They made their way through the crowd slowly, Charles stopping to shake hands, accept embraces, listen to stories whispered urgently into his ear. By the time they reached the council chambers, he felt simultaneously uplifted and crushed by the weight of what his morning in the park had become. The chamber was packed beyond capacity, people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. At the front, the city council members sat behind their raised bench, looking varying degrees of uncomfortable. Mayor Patricia Vance, a competent politician in her second term, gavelled the meeting to order with visible tension in her shoulders. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to acknowledge that we're here tonight because of a serious incident that occurred in our community. Mr. Charles Thompson, a beloved resident and respected architect, was treated inappropriately by a member of our police force. We've invited Mr. Thompson here tonight, and I'd like to—" "With respect, Mayor Vance," Chief Mitchell interrupted, standing from his seat in the front row. "I think we need to be clearer about what happened. Mr. Thompson wasn't treated inappropriately. He was racially profiled, harassed, and subjected to treatment that endangered his health. Let's call it what it was." A murmur swept through the crowd. Charles saw Mitchell's jaw set, saw the cost of that honesty in his eyes. The chief was burning bridges within his own department, and he knew it. "Thank you, Chief Mitchell," the mayor recovered. "You're right. We need to be direct about this." She looked out into the crowd until she found Charles. "Mr. Thompson, would you be willing to speak to what happened?" All eyes turned to him. Charles stood slowly, feeling his children's hands supporting his elbows, their presence a steady anchor. "I'll speak," he said. "But first, I want to hear from Officer Daniels." The chamber erupted, shouts of protest, angry voices demanding why they should give him a platform. Charles raised his hand, waiting for quiet. "Please, I need to hear what he has to say. We all do. Because if we're going to change anything, we need to understand how we got here." After a moment of tense silence, a young man in civilian clothes stood from the back corner. Officer Daniels looked smaller without his uniform, younger. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept in days. He walked down the aisle like a man approaching his own execution. When he reached the microphone stand set up for public comment, his hands shook so badly he could barely adjust the height. "Mr. Thompson," Daniel's voice cracked. I don't know how to apologize for what I did. There aren't words big enough. I saw you in the park and I made assumptions based on—" He swallowed hard. "Based on prejudices I didn't even know I had. Or maybe I did know, and I told myself they were just being cautious or doing my job. But they weren't. They were racism, pure and simple." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Too little, too late." Daniels flinched but continued. "You're right. It probably is too late. I can't take back what I did. Can't undo the harm. But I want you all to know that I've spent the last 2 days reviewing every call I've made, every stop I've initiated, every interaction I've had as an officer, and I'm seeing patterns I didn't want to see. Ways I've treated people differently based on nothing but appearance. His voice grew stronger, more urgent. I grew up in Millbrook, the next town over. Nice neighborhood, good schools. I became a cop because I wanted to help people to protect my community. But nobody ever taught me that my community included everyone. That protection shouldn't be conditional. That the fear I was taught to feel around certain people wasn't instinct. It was learned behavior. Daniels turned to face Charles directly. Sir, I'm ashamed. I'm horrified at myself. And I'm angry that I had to hurt you to finally see what I was doing. You almost died because of my ignorance. Your family suffered. And for what? Because you were sitting on a bench you designed. His voice broke completely. I'm so sorry. I know that's not enough. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm sorry. The chamber was silent now, hundreds of people holding their breath. Charles stood again, and this time he walked forward on his own, leaving his children behind. He crossed the distance between his seat and the microphone stand where Daniels stood trembling. Officer Daniels, Charles said quietly, but his voice carried in the hushed space. Do you know why I wanted you to speak tonight? No, sir? Because apologies without understanding are just noise. I needed to know if you comprehend what you did, not just the action, but the context, the history, the weight of being seen as dangerous simply for existing. Charles paused. Do you understand now? I'm beginning to, Daniels whispered. I have so much to learn. Yes, you do. And that learning that's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to hear things that make you defensive. You're going to want to explain yourself, justify your actions. Don't. Just listen. Just learn. Can you do that? Daniels nodded, tears streaming down his face. Charles turned to address the full chamber. I don't forgive Officer Daniels. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness is personal, and I'm not ready to give it. But I'm willing to participate in his education. In all of our education. Because this... He gestured to the packed room. This isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that sees people like me as inherently suspicious. That trains officers to fear first and understand later. That values order over justice. His voice rose, gaining strength. I'm 73 years old. I've designed buildings that will outlast me by centuries, but the most important structure I can help build now is one of understanding, of genuine change. Chief Mitchell has proposed a series of community conversations, bringing together officers and residents to talk honestly about bias, fear, and what real public safety looks like. I've agreed to lead those conversations. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. Some of you will think I'm being too soft, too accommodating. That Officer Daniels deserves punishment, not education. Charles's eyes were fierce. He's been suspended. There will be consequences. But punishment alone changes nothing. We've been punishing for generations, and look where we are. So now we try something different. We try the harder thing, transformation. He looked at Mayor Vance. But this only works if the city commits resources. Real resources. Not just a few workshops and some revised policy language. We need ongoing training, community oversight, mental health support for officers dealing with their own trauma and bias. We need to rebuild trust, one conversation, one relationship at a time. The mayor nodded slowly. Mr. Thompson, you have my commitment, and I believe I speak for the council when I say we'll provide whatever resources this work requires. The council members voiced their agreement, some more enthusiastically than others, but the motion was clear. Charles turned back to Daniels. I want you in those conversations. Front row. Listening. Learning. Being uncomfortable. Because that discomfort, that's where growth happens. Yes, sir. Daniels managed. Thank you. Thank you for this chance. Don't thank me. Prove to me, prove to all of us that people can change. that this system can change. The meeting continued for 2 more hours, residents standing one by one to share their own experiences, their fears, their hopes. Charles listened to all of it, his heart breaking and healing in alternating waves. These were his neighbors, his community. And they'd been carrying these burdens in silence, waiting for permission to speak their truth. When it was finally over, when the last speaker had shared and the mayor had gavelled the meeting closed, Charles felt Robert's arm around his shoulders. "That was incredible, Dad. You were incredible." "I was just honest," Charles said, suddenly feeling every one of his 73 years. "Can we go home now? I need to sit down." But before they could leave, Chief Mitchell approached his face, etched with something Charles couldn't quite name. "Mr. Thompson, what you did tonight, giving Daniels a chance to speak, committing to this process that took courage most people don't have." "It took exhaustion, Chief. I'm too tired to keep fighting the same fight the same way. So we try something new." Mitchell extended his hand. "Then let's try it together. The first community conversation is scheduled for next week. Will you be ready?" Charles took his hand, felt the firm grip, the sincerity. "I'll be ready. Question is, will your officers?" "Some will, some won't. But we're going to do this anyway." As they walked out into the October night, the crowd still milling in the parking lot, Charles felt Diane squeeze his arm. "Mom would be proud," she said softly. "Your mother would have done this 20 years ago and done it better," Charles replied. But he was smiling. "She always was braver than me." "You're pretty brave yourself, old man." Robert drove them home through streets that seemed both familiar and strange, past the barber shop and the corner store and the small houses with their tidy lawns. Past the park, his park now empty in the darkness, but somehow alive with possibility. Change was coming to Oakwood. Slow, difficult, uncomfortable change. But change nonetheless. And Charles Thompson, retired architect and unwilling activist, was going to help build it. One conversation at a time. The community center on Maple Street had seen better days. Its linoleum floors were scuffed from decades of youth basketball games, bake sales, and senior citizen dances. The fluorescent lights hummed with a slight flicker that no one had bothered to fix. But on this Thursday evening, 1 week after the city council meeting, the tired old building became something else entirely, a crucible where fear and hope would collide. Charles arrived early, as was his habit. He walked through the main hall, now arranged with folding chairs in a large circle, and felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. 30 chairs, 15 police officers, 15 community members. No table to hide behind, no barriers between them. Just people facing each other. Chief Mitchell was already there, helping arrange the chairs with a nervousness Charles hadn't seen in him before. The chief looked up when Charles entered, relief washing over his features. "Thank God. I was worried you'd changed your mind." "I don't change my mind, Chief. I'm just slow in the mornings." Charles set down his messenger bag, the same worn leather one he'd carried to job sites for 40 years. Inside were notes, questions, the framework he'd been developing all week. "Are your officers really ready for this?" "Some are. Some think this is a waste of time. A few are openly hostile to the whole idea." Mitchell straightened a chair that didn't need straightening. "Daniels will be here. He's been different since the council meeting. Quieter. Reading everything he can find about implicit bias and systemic racism. I think he's trying." "Trying is a start," Charles said. "But tonight, we need more than trying. We need honesty. Raw, uncomfortable honesty." The room began to fill. Officers arrived in clusters, some in uniform, others in civilian clothes, per Charles's request. He wanted to strip away as many symbols of authority as possible, force everyone to see each other as human beings first. They took seats with the wariness of people entering enemy territory, backs straight, faces carefully neutral. The community members came next. Rosa Rodriguez, with her sister Carmen. Marcus from the barber shop. 3 teenagers from Oakwood High School that Charles didn't know, but who'd apparently requested to participate. Mrs. Chen with her adult son David. A young black woman named Keisha who worked at the library. Others Charles recognized from the neighborhood people whose stories he'd heard in fragments over the years, but never all together, never this raw. Officer Daniels was the last to arrive, slipping through the door like a shadow. He looked thinner than he had at the council meeting, hollowed out. When his eyes met Charles's, there was something desperate in them, a drowning man reaching for a lifeline he didn't deserve but needed anyway. "Find a seat, officer," Charles said quietly. Daniels took the chair directly across from Charles, refusing to hide. At least there was that. When everyone was settled, the circle complete, Charles stood. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming. I know this isn't easy for anyone here. The community members are sitting with people they've been taught to fear, people who represent a system that has often failed them. The officers are sitting with people they've been trained to view as potential threats, people whose pain challenges everything they believe about their own goodness." He paused, letting that truth settle. "Tonight, we're going to do something harder than arguing. We're going to listen." A police officer near the back, Sergeant Henderson, according to his nameplate, shifted uncomfortably. "With respect, Mr. Thompson, we've been through sensitivity training. We know how to interact with diverse communities." "This isn't sensitivity training, Sergeant. This is something different. Tonight, you're not going to learn how to interact with us. You're going to understand why we flinch when you approach. Why mothers teach their children to keep their hands visible. Why a man my age knows the exact protocol for surviving a traffic stop." Charles's voice was gentle but unyielding. "And we're going to understand that some of you became officers for good reasons. That you carry your own trauma. That the system that hurts us also damages you." He sat back down, making himself level with everyone else. "We start with a simple exercise. Each person shares a moment when they felt genuinely unsafe. Not theoretical danger, real lived experience. Officers first. Who wants to begin?" The silence stretched out, brittle and uncomfortable. Finally, a young female officer named Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen as it turned out, raised her hand slightly. "I'll go." Her voice was steadier than her hands. 3 years ago, I responded to a domestic violence call in Riverside. When I got there, the husband was drunk, waving a baseball bat. My partner was still the block away. The man looked at me and laughed. Said, "They sent a little Chinese girl to arrest me." I remember thinking this was it. This was how I'd die. He charged and She swallowed hard. I pulled my weapon, shouted for him to stop. He didn't. My partner arrived just in time. We got him down, but I still have nightmares about his face when he was running at me. The room absorbed this, the reality of Officer Chen's fear. "Thank you for sharing that," Charles said. "Who else?" One by one, the officers spoke. Sergeant Martinez talked about being first on scene to a shooting where a 16-year-old bled out in his arms, how he still saw that boy's face every time he closed his eyes. Officer Peterson described being attacked during a routine traffic stop, the knife that nearly severed his radial artery, the 6 months of physical therapy. Each story peeled back another layer, revealing the humanity underneath the uniform. Then it was the community's turn. Marcus went first, his deep voice carrying the weight of accumulated injustice. "I was 19, driving my mother's car to pick up my little sister from dance class. Got pulled over in Westfield, the nice part of town. Officer said my taillight was out. It wasn't, but I didn't argue. He asked for license and registration. I reached for the glove box and he drew his weapon, pointed it right at my head, screamed at me to show my hands. I was so terrified I couldn't move. I just froze with my hand halfway to the glove box, thinking about my sister waiting at the dance studio, thinking about my mother having to identify my body." Marcus's jaw clenched. Another officer arrived, calmed his partner down. They let me go with a warning for nothing, because my taillight was fine. But I sat in that parking lot for 30 minutes afterward, shaking so hard I couldn't drive. My sister called 3 times wondering where I was. To this day, I can't reach across my car without that moment flashing back. Officer Peterson, the one who'd been stabbed during a traffic stop, shifted in his seat. "I'm sorry that happened to you." "Are you?" Marcus's eyes were sharp. "Or are you sorry I'm making you uncomfortable by talking about it?" "I'm sorry because I understand what it's like to be terrified during a routine stop. Mine went bad because the guy actually had a weapon. Yours went bad because the officer assumed you did." The distinction hung in the air between them. Rosa spoke next, her accented English careful and precise. "When my daughter Maya was in kindergarten, we went to the grocery store. She was playing running around like children do, laughing and touching everything. The security guard followed us through every aisle. Finally, he stopped me at the door and demanded to search my bags. I had the receipt in my hand. Didn't matter. He searched anyway, right there in front of everyone. Maya was crying, asking why the man was being mean to Mama. I had no answer to give her that wouldn't break something inside her." Mrs. Chen added her own story about her grandson being followed in a convenience store, despite having money visible in his hand, the clerk's assumption that a young Asian boy must be there to steal. David Chen, her son, described being pulled from his car at gunpoint because he matched the description of a suspect, the description being simply Asian male 20s. The three teenagers went next. Jamal, 16, talked about being stopped and frisked 7 times in the past year, walking home from school. "Same route every day, same backpack, same me, but somehow I'm always suspicious." His voice cracked with adolescent anger barely contained. "My white friends walk the same streets. Nobody stops them." Keisha from the library spoke about being followed in department stores, having her credit card examined extra carefully, being asked for additional ID when her white colleagues weren't. "It's death by 1,000 cuts," she said softly. "Each one small enough to be dismissed, but together they bleed you dry. They make you question yourself, make you wonder if you're crazy for feeling this way." And then Charles spoke. He told them about being 8 years old, watching his father get pulled from their car and thrown against the hood for driving too slow through a white neighborhood. About being 15 and having police rough him up because he was sketching a building, looked suspicious writing in a notebook. About being 30, a licensed architect with a degree from Cornell, and still being asked if he was the janitor when he showed up at client meetings. "I'm 73 years old," Charles said, his voice heavy with 7 decades of this same story on repeat. "I've achieved things people said I couldn't, built things that will stand long after I'm gone. And yet last week, an officer looked at me sitting on a bench and saw a threat. Not a man, not a neighbor, not the person who designed that very bench, just a threat to be neutralized." He looked directly at Daniels. "That's what we live with. That's the weight we carry every single day. And it's not your fault, Officer Daniels, that you were trained to see me that way. But it is your responsibility to unlearn it." Daniels' face was wet with tears. "I don't know how. I don't know where to start." "You start by believing us," Jamal said, leaning forward in his seat. "When we tell you something hurt, believe it hurt. Don't explain it away. Don't tell us we're oversensitive. Just believe us." Officer Henderson spoke up, his voice defensive. "But how do we do our jobs if we can't be cautious, if we can't assess situations for potential danger?" "There's a difference between caution and prejudice," David Chen countered. "Caution is based on behavior. Prejudice is based on appearance." "But behavior can escalate quickly," another officer started. "So can fear," Marcus interrupted. "Your fear, our fear, it escalates because we've been taught to expect the worst from each other. How do we break that cycle?" The conversation opened up then, no longer controlled or structured, but alive, messy, real. Officers and community members talking over each other, challenging, defending, slowly, painfully. Slowly beginning to see each other as complex humans rather than monoliths. Sergeant Martinez asked the teenagers what would make them feel safer during police interactions. Jamal's answer, "Maybe if you approached us with curiosity instead of suspicion, asked our names before demanding ID," seemed to genuinely surprise him. Rosa asked Officer Chen what she wished community members understood about her job. That I'm terrified every single day, Chen admitted. That I kiss my kids goodbye each morning not knowing if I'll come home. That the uniform doesn't make me invincible, it makes me a target. We're all targets, Keisha said quietly. Different kinds maybe, but we all live with fear. Charles watched it unfold, this fragile bridge being built from honesty and pain. It wasn't comfortable. People got angry. Voices rose. At one point, Officer Henderson stood up, looking ready to leave, but Sergeant Martinez pulled him back down with a look that said, "You don't get to run from this." 2 hours passed, then 3. The community center's janitor appeared at the door looking confused about why people were still there, but Chief Mitchell waved him away. Finally, Charles stood again. "We're going to end with one more exercise. I want each officer to pair with a community member. Just 2 minutes of eye contact. No talking, just seeing each other." There was resistance. This felt too intimate, too vulnerable. But slowly people moved their chairs paired off. Officer Daniels and Marcus, Sergeant Martinez and Rosa, Officer Chen and Jamal, others finding partners sitting knee to knee meeting each other's eyes. The room filled with heavy breathing sniffles, the sound of barriers cracking. 2 minutes stretched into 5. Some pairs held hands, others wept openly. The intimacy of being truly seen, of seeing, truly overwhelmed them. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. The silence was different now, less hostile, more sacred. "Same time next week," Charles said, "and every week after, until we don't need to anymore." People filed out slowly, some in the same groups they'd arrived in, others in new configurations. Charles saw Marcus and Officer Peterson exchanging phone numbers, talking in low voices. Rosa hugging Officer Chen. Jamal teaching Officer Henderson some handshake he'd apparently never seen before, both of them laughing. Daniels approached Charles last when the room was nearly empty. "Mr. Thompson, he struggled for words. "I want to ride with you. Go on patrol with Marcus, with Jamal, with people who can show me what I can't see. Would that be okay?" Charles studied him. "You ready for that? It won't be easy. They'll test you, push back, make you face things you'd rather not." "I know. I need it anyway." "Then yes, I'll arrange it." Charles paused. "But Officer Daniels, this isn't about your redemption. This is about preventing the next time. The next person sitting on a bench who shouldn't have to prove they belong. Can you accept that?" "Yes, sir. I can." After Daniels left, Chief Mitchell helped Charles stack chairs in exhausted silence. "That was extraordinary," the chief finally said. "Painful, but extraordinary." "That's what change feels like," Charles replied. "If it doesn't hurt, you're not doing it right." Robert appeared in the doorway, having waited outside per Charles's request. "Ready, Dad?" "Almost." Charles took one last look at the empty circle of chairs, this space they'd created for truth-telling. "Chief, I need something from you." "Name it." "I want young people leading the next session, Jamal and his friends. They're the ones who will live longest with whatever we build here. They should have a voice in building it." Mitchell nodded slowly. "That makes sense. But will they be willing? Only one way to find out." The next morning, Charles sat on his porch, not at the park, not yet ready to return there, drinking his coffee and watching the neighborhood wake up. His phone rang. Jamal's number passed along by Keisha, who had it from the high school's volunteer coordinator. "Mr. Thompson, this is Jamal. Chief Mitchell said you wanted to talk to us about leading the next session." "I did. What do you think?" There was a long pause. "I think adults have been running these conversations forever and nothing changes. I think my generation's tired of waiting for y'all to figure it out. I think—" Jamal's voice strengthened. "I think we can do this. Differently. Better." "Then show me. Show all of us. What does healing look like to young people who've grown up in this mess? When's the next meeting?" "Next Thursday, 7 p.m., same place." "We'll be ready." Charles smiled. I believe you will. The week that followed was a flurry of activity. Jamal and his friends, Maya's older sister Lucia, a boy named Terrence, who'd been stopped by police 12 times before his 18th birthday, and a white girl named Emma, who'd watched her black boyfriend get harassed at the mall, took over planning. They created exercises Charles would never have thought of, brought in music and art and poetry. They invited more young people, including some from the police academy, who were barely older than them. We're doing a prayer circle, Lucia announced when she came to Charles's house to discuss plans. Not religious, just intentional. Setting intentions for what we want to create. And after the prayer circle, Charles asked, we're going to rewrite the narrative. Literally. Everyone writes their worst experience with police or with community members, depending on which side they're on, and then we rewrite it together. How it should have gone. How it could go next time. Charles felt something loosen in his chest. That's brilliant. We learned from you, Terrence said, appearing behind Lucia with a stack of poster boards. You showed us that transformation is possible. Now we're going to show you what's possible when you let young people lead. Thursday arrived again. The community center filled with a different energy, this time younger, louder, more hopeful. The original participants returned, but now they were joined by dozens of teenagers and 20-somethings, all arranged in circles within the larger circle, creating a web of connection. Jamal stood in the center, his voice clear and strong. My name is Jamal Richards. I'm 16 years old. I've been stopped by police 7 times this year, and I'm tired. He looked around the room. We're all tired. Tired of fear. Tired of anger. Tired of this cycle that keeps repeating. So tonight we break it. Tonight we imagine something new. What happened over the next 3 hours was something Charles would remember for the rest of his life. Young people and officers, community members and cadets all writing their pain on poster boards, and then together rewriting it into hope. They created scenarios, role-played, then practiced new ways of being. An officer learned to approach Jamal with, Hey, I'm Officer Williams. I'm on patrol in this neighborhood. Mind if I ask your name? Instead of, what are you doing here? Jamal learned to respond with, I'm Jamal. I live 3 blocks that way, heading home from school. Instead of the defensive silence fear had taught him. They practiced traffic stops where officers explained their reasoning before demanding compliance. Practiced community interactions where residents asked officers about their families before discussing neighborhood problems. Small shifts, but seismic in their implications. During the prayer circle, Officer Daniels spoke his intention. I want to see people, not threats. I want to serve, not control. I want to be worthy of this badge. Marcus spoke his, I want my nephew to grow up unafraid. I want to teach him pride, not survival tactics. When it was Charles's turn, he surprised himself with what came out. I want to sit on a bench in the park I designed and just read my newspaper. I want to be an old man enjoying his coffee without thinking about whether my existence threatens someone. I want to be ordinary. Rosa, sitting next to him, squeezed his hand. You're already extraordinary, but I understand. As the evening wound down, Chief Mitchell stood to make an announcement. The city has agreed to fund this program permanently. These conversations will continue and they'll expand. Every officer will participate in at least 6 sessions. Every high school in Oakwood will have student-led dialogue groups, and Mr. Thompson and our youth leaders will oversee it all. The room erupted in applause. Charles felt tears on his face. When had he started crying and didn't bother to wipe them away? Outside afterward, as people lingered in the parking lot, unwilling to let go of what they'd created, Daniels approached Charles one last time. I start my ride-along with Marcus next week, and I've enrolled in classes at the community college, African American Studies. I need to understand what I don't know. Good, Charles said simply. That's good. Will you ever forgive me, Mr. Thompson? Charles considered this carefully. I don't know yet, but I believe you can become someone who deserves forgiveness. That's enough for now. Daniels nodded, accepting this truth, and walked away with the burden of possibility on his shoulders. As Robert drove Charles home past the darkened park that had started all this, Charles thought about foundations and structures about the buildings he'd designed and the community he was helping rebuild. Some structures took decades to construct. Some required tearing down what existed and starting fresh. This work, this transformation was both and neither. It was something altogether new. And Charles Thompson at 73 was still building. 3 months passed, like water finding its course, slowly reshaping the landscape of Oakwood. Charles marked time not by the calendar, but by small victories that accumulated like interest in a savings account, modest individually, transformative collectively. The first sign came on a Saturday morning in January, when Charles finally returned to his bench in the park. He'd avoided it since that October morning, the memory still too raw, the space still contaminated by trauma. But Diane had insisted, and Robert, who'd extended his visit indefinitely, had agreed. "You can't let fear win, Dad," Robert had said over breakfast. "That park is yours. You made it. Don't let one bad morning take it from you." So Charles went, coffee in hand, newspaper tucked under his arm, heart hammering against his ribs despite the medication keeping it steady. He walked the curved pathways he'd designed, each turn deliberate, each sightline carefully calculated to create moments of discovery. The fountain was running despite the cold water crystallizing at the edges where it touched stone. When he reached his bench, he found something unexpected. A small plaque had been added beneath the original dedication, its bronze surface bright and new. "Charles Thompson sat here. He belonged here. We all belong here." Charles stood staring at those words until his vision blurred. Someone had done this. The city, the neighborhood, someone had understood that belonging wasn't assumed, it had to be declared protected, made visible. "Mr. Thompson." He turned to find Officer Chen, the young woman from the dialogue sessions, in uniform, but off-duty, walking her dog through the park. "Officer Chen." Charles's body tensed involuntarily, and he hated himself for it. She noticed her face falling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I can go—" "No." Charles forced himself to breathe to stay. "No, please. I'm just adjusting." Chen moved closer slowly, her golden retriever wagging enthusiastically. "This is Samson. He's friendly but has no boundaries. Fair warning." The dog bounded over, and Charles found himself laughing as Samson tried to climb into his lap, all 70 pounds of him convinced he was a lapdog. "Down, Sam! Down!" Chen pulled the dog back, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. It's nice to be greeted with enthusiasm rather than suspicion." The words came out before Charles could stop them, sharp-edged and honest. Chen sat on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them. "I come here every Saturday. Have for 2 years. This is my favorite park in the city. I never knew you designed it until—" She trailed off. "Until I became famous for all the wrong reasons. Until you taught us what we should have known all along." She turned to face him directly. "Mr. Thompson, I joined the force because my uncle was a cop. He made it seem noble, important. But nobody ever taught me to question my assumptions, to see my biases. What you're doing with those sessions, it's changing how we think, how we see. Is it, or are people just saying the right things until the heat dies down?" Chen considered this carefully. "Some are just performing, yes. But others, Officer Daniels, Sergeant Martinez, even crusty old Henderson, they're really trying. Daniels especially. He's like a different person." Charles had heard as much from Marcus, who'd completed 2 ride-alongs with Daniels and reported cautious optimism. "He asks questions now," Marcus had said. "Real questions, about why certain neighborhoods are over-policed, why traffic stops escalate. He's uncomfortable all the time, but he's staying uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable," Charles said, more to himself than to Chen. They sat together in companionable silence, watching the park come alive with morning joggers and dog walkers. A young family arrived, their toddler shrieking with joy at the sight of the fountain. The normalcy of it all felt both ordinary and miraculous. "Can I ask you something?" Chen said finally. "Of course." "Do you think we'll ever get to a place where this," she gestured between them, "doesn't require conscious effort, where you don't tense up when you see a uniform, where I don't wonder if every interaction might turn violent?" Charles thought about Margaret, about the world she'd fought for and hadn't lived to see, about Maya and Jamal, and all the children who deserved better than inherited trauma. "I think we'll get to a place where it's easier," he said slowly, "where trust is built instead of destroyed, where the default is connection, not suspicion, but easy no. This work is generational. We plant seeds, others water them. Eventually there's fruit, but it takes time." Chen nodded, accepting this. "Then I guess we keep planting." After she left, Charles sat alone on his bench, drinking his coffee, reading his paper. 2 officers on foot patrol passed by and waved. A group of teenagers playing pickup basketball shouted, "Morning, Mr. Thompson!" He waved back, feeling something loosening in his chest, some grip fear had maintained, finally beginning to release. The community dialogues continued every Thursday, growing in size and scope. By February, they'd expanded to 3 simultaneous sessions, one for adults, one for youth, one for officers, specifically wrestling with their role in systemic harm. Jamal and his crew ran the youth sessions with a combination of creativity and unflinching honesty that left adults humbled. Charles attended when he could, but increasingly he found himself in a different role, consultant rather than leader, elder statesman rather than general. The young people were taking ownership, and that was exactly as it should be. "You built the foundation," Lucia told him after one particularly powerful session where 2 former rivals, a police cadet and a kid who'd been arrested 4 times before his 18th birthday, had ended up in tears talking about their shared fear of their own fathers. "Now we get to build the house." "Just make sure it has good bones," Charles replied. "And plenty of windows. Light matters." By March, Chief Mitchell approached Charles with a proposal. The city wanted to formalize what they'd been doing, create an official program with funding structure sustainability. They were calling it Bridge Builders, and they wanted Charles to serve on the advisory board. "It's mostly ceremonial," Mitchell explained, sitting in Charles's living room with blueprints spread across the coffee table, "not for buildings this time, but for organizational structure. You'd attend quarterly meetings, provide guidance, lend your name and credibility. The Youth Council would handle day-to-day operations." "Who's on this Youth Council?" Charles asked. "Jamal's chairing it. Lucia, Terrence, Emma, plus 3 police cadets under 25. They'll report directly to the mayor's office." Charles studied the proposal, seeing his own architectural principles reflected in its design. Distributed authority, multiple access points, feedback loops built into every level. Whoever had designed this understood structure. "Did you create this?" Mitchell shook his head. "Jamal did. Kid's a genius. He's applying to college for social work. Says he wants to design systems instead of just surviving them." The chief smiled. "Wonder where he learned that." 3 days later, Charles attended the official launch of Bridge Builders at City Hall. The mayor was there along with council members, police brass, and what seemed like half of Oakwood. But the speaker's podium belonged to the young people. Jamal spoke first, his voice clear and commanding. "Bridge Builders isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about imagining what's possible. For too long, police and community have been adversaries. We're rewriting that story. We're creating partnerships, relationships, trust." Lucia followed, describing the programs they'd developed: officer youth mentorships, community cookouts where cops weren't there to patrol, but to participate, restorative justice circles for minor offenses. "We're building a world where my little sister Maya doesn't grow up afraid," she said, "where she sees police as neighbors, not threats." Emma talked about privilege, about the work white community members needed to do. "I didn't understand," she admitted to the crowd. "I thought racism was just individual acts of meanness. I didn't see the system. Bridge Builders opened my eyes. Now I can't unsee it, and I don't want to." When Officer Daniels was invited to speak, Charles saw how much the young man had changed. The swagger was gone, replaced by humility that seemed genuine rather than performed. "6 months ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," Daniels said, his voice thick with emotion. "I profiled Mr. Charles Thompson because of his race. I put my hands on him. I nearly caused his death." He paused, gathering himself. "I can't undo that, but I can commit to never repeating it. Through bridge builders, I've learned to see my biases, to question my assumptions, to recognize that the fear I was taught to feel was really racism dressed up as caution." He looked directly at Charles in the audience. "Mr. Thompson gave me a chance I didn't deserve. This program gives all of us that chance to be better than we were, to build something new from the rubble of what failed. I'm honored to be part of it." The applause was mixed, some enthusiastic, some reserved. Change was still controversial, but it was happening. After the ceremony, as people mingled over coffee and cookies that Mrs. Chen's restaurant had donated, Maya appeared at Charles's elbow. She was 7 now, taller, still bursting with that irrepressible energy that made adults both exhausted and hopeful. "Grandpa Thompson, did you hear Lucia talk about me?" "I did, sweetheart. She's very proud of you." "I'm proud of you too," Maya said solemnly. "Mama says you're making the world better." Charles knelt down, ignoring the protest from his knees. "We're all making it better, Maya. Every person who chooses kindness over fear, understanding over judgment, we're all part of it. Even me. Especially you. You're the future we're building for." Maya threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him over. Over her shoulder, Charles saw Rosa watching, tears streaming down her face. She mouthed, "Thank you." And Charles nodded, throat too tight to speak. Spring arrived with the subtlety of a revelation, one day bare branches the next, covered in pink blossoms. Charles marked the 6-month anniversary of that October morning by returning to his full routine coffee newspaper bench. But now the park was different, alive with programming born from bridge builders. Every Saturday morning, officers played basketball with neighborhood kids on the court near the community garden. Not as authority figures, but as people laughing when they missed shots, teaching fundamentals, learning trash talk from teenagers who could run circles around them. Charles watched from his bench as Officer Peterson, the one who'd been stabbed during a traffic stop, showed Jamal's little cousin how to shoot free throws. Bend your knees, eye on the rim, follow through. The boy made the shot and jumped into Peterson's arms, celebrating like he'd won the championship. Tuesday evenings brought community cookouts, where officers brought their families and residents brought dishes from their diverse cultural backgrounds. Charles had watched Officer Daniels learn to make tamales from Rosa, his hands clumsy but earnest as she guided him through the process. "You fold here like this," Rosa had demonstrated. "See, not so hard." "Everything about this is hard," Daniels had replied, laughing at his misshapen attempt. "But I'm learning." The program expanded beyond Oakwood. Other cities reached out wanting to replicate what they'd built. Jamal and Lucia became sought-after speakers, traveling to schools and police academies, sharing their story. They always brought officers with them, usually Daniels, sometimes Martinez or Chen, showing that transformation required participation from both sides. By summer, the changes were visible everywhere. Crime rates had dropped not because of increased enforcement, but because of increased connection. People looked out for each other differently now. Officers knew residents' names, their children's names, their dreams and struggles. But it wasn't all success. There were setbacks, moments when the old patterns reasserted themselves. An officer from a neighboring jurisdiction stopped Terrence in Oakwood, despite him wearing his bridge builder's shirt, despite carrying ID, despite doing nothing wrong. The video went viral. Another black teenager, another aggressive cop, the cycle threatening to repeat. But this time, the response was different. Chief Mitchell immediately invited the officer to a dialogue session. The Oakwood community rallied around Terrence, not with violence, but with visible solidarity. And most importantly, the young people didn't lose hope. "This is why we do this work," Jamal said at an emergency community meeting. "Because it's not finished. It'll never be finished. But each time it happens, we have more tools, more understanding, more people willing to stand up and say, 'Not here, not anymore.'" Charles watched these young leaders and felt something he hadn't felt in years, certainty that the future would be better than the past. Not perfect, not easy, but better. By the time October rolled around again, marking 1 full year since that morning on the bench, Oakwood had become something remarkable. The local paper ran a feature, "How One City Turned Crisis into Transformation." National news picked it up. Politicians called it a model. But Charles knew the truth. This wasn't a model to be replicated exactly. It was proof that change was possible, that humans could choose differently when given the tools and opportunity. The anniversary celebration took place in the park naturally. Hundreds gathered around the fountain, now officially renamed the Thompson Fountain, with a new dedication that read, "May this water remind us that change, though slow, is unstoppable." Dedicated to Charles Thompson, who taught us to build bridges instead of walls. Charles stood before the fountain with Diane and Robert on one side, Rosa and Maya on the other, surrounded by a community he'd helped reshape. Chief Mitchell presented him with a key to the city, which Charles accepted with grace while privately thinking keys were symbolic nonsense. What mattered was the faces before him. Black, white, Asian, Latino, young and old officers and residents all gathered not in protest, but in celebration of what they'd built together. Officer Daniels had news to share. He approached Charles nervously after the official program ended and people were mingling, eating Mrs. Chen's donated dumplings and Marcus's barbecue. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to hear this from me first. I'm leaving the force." Charles's eyebrows rose. "Oh, I've been accepted into a master's program for social work. I want to work with at-risk youth, help them navigate the system that's failed so many of them. I realized I can do more good outside the uniform than in it." Daniel's voice was steady, certain. "Bridge builders showed me who I want to be. I want to build, not police." Charles extended his hand. "Then I wish you every success. The world needs people willing to do the hard work of transformation." "I learned from the best." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "I'll never forget what you gave me, not forgiveness, but possibility. That was harder to give and more valuable." After Daniels left, Charles stood alone for a moment, watching the fountain's water catch the afternoon light and throw diamonds across the grass. The park was full of life children playing, teenagers lounging on blankets, elderly folks sitting on benches, officers playing frisbee with residents. It looked exactly how he'd imagined it 30 years ago when he'd first sketched these pathways. No, that wasn't quite right. It looked better, because he'd designed the space, but the community had filled it with meaning. Maya appeared at his side, slipping her small hand into his weathered one. "Grandpa Thompson." "Yes, sweetheart. How did you make this park so peaceful?" Charles looked down at her upturned face, so full of innocence and hope. He thought about all the answers he could give, the architectural principles, the careful design, the city council battles. But that wasn't what she was really asking. He knelt down, meeting her eyes at her level. "I didn't make it peaceful, Maya. We all did. Every person who chose to see each other as human beings first. Every officer who questioned their assumptions. Every resident who extended trust instead of fear. Every young person like your sister Lucia, who refused to accept the world as it was and insisted it could be better." Maya considered this seriously. "But you started it. You sat on that bench even when people said you didn't belong." "No, baby girl. I sat on that bench because I helped build it. The real courage came from people like Officer Daniels, who admitted they were wrong. People like Jamal, who turned their pain into purpose. People like your mother, who taught you to be kind even when the world wasn't kind back." "So, how do I help?" Maya asked. "I'm just 7. Charles smiled, his heart so full it ached. "You help by planting seeds, one act of courage at a time. Every time you're kind to someone different from you. Every time you speak up when you see something wrong. Every time you choose to build bridges instead of walls. Those are seeds, Maya. And someday, when you're old like me, you'll look around and see forests you helped grow. And now it's your turn to water them. Charles finished, his voice gentle but certain. Maya nodded solemnly, as if he'd given her a sacred task. I can do that. I'm good at watering things. Mama lets me water our garden. Then this park is your garden too, all of ours. As the sun began to set behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Charles stood with Maya's hand still in his, watching the community he'd helped transform. Officer Peterson was teaching free throws to Jamal's cousin. Rosa and Officer Chen were sharing recipes by the fountain. Diane was talking with Chief Mitchell about expanding bridge builders to neighboring cities. Robert was playing soccer with a group of teenagers who'd convinced him he wasn't too old yet. And there on the bench where everything had started, where Charles had been harassed, humiliated, nearly killed by prejudice and fear. Sergeant Martinez sat reading to his young daughter, just a father enjoying the park with his child. The park hadn't changed. The fountain still sprayed water, the pathways still curved gracefully, the community garden still bloomed with vegetables and flowers. But everything had changed. The meaning they'd poured into this space, the relationships they'd built, the trust they'd cultivated, that was the real transformation. Charles felt Margaret's presence beside him, could almost hear her voice. You did good, Charles. You did real good. We did good, Maggie, he whispered back. All of us. Maya tugged his hand. Grandpa Thompson. Can we come back next Saturday? You and me, I want to bring seeds to plant in the community garden. I'd like that very much, sweetheart. As they walked toward the parking lot, Charles took one last look at the park, bathed in golden hour light. This place had nearly broken him. Instead, it had revealed something he'd forgotten in 73 years of fighting to belong. He didn't have to fight alone. Community, when given the chance, would fight with him, for each other. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new conflicts, new moments requiring courage. But today, in this park, in this community, change was alive and growing. Slow, yes. Imperfect, absolutely. But real. Oakwood Park had become exactly what Charles had always dreamed it could be. Not just a park, but proof. Proof that people could change. Proof that systems could be transformed. Proof that dignity, when defended with courage and sustained with hope, could defeat even the deepest prejudice. As Charles Thompson walked toward the parking lot with Maya skipping beside him, the evening birds began their songs. Behind them, the fountain continued its eternal flow, water, becoming light, becoming possibility, becoming hope. And in a city called Oakwood, on a piece of land that had witnessed both the worst and best of humanity, seeds planted by an old architect and watered by a community determined to grow, those seeds were finally beginning to bloom.